Welcome everyone to this event. Right in the beginning, I recently had a thyroid surgery, so I can't speak very loudly. So sorry, I'll try to be as clear as possible, but if you can't hear me, try to be very quiet. Okay, so this is the third installment in our Decolonizing Europe Lecture Series. My name is Fatima. I'm a professor of ethnicity, race, and migration, and women's gender and sexuality study. And I'm organizing this series in conjunction with the Decolonizing Europe graduate course and the Race, Migration, and Coloniality in Europe working group, with the support of the Yale Center for the Study of Race, Indigeneity, and Transnational Migration, the Mellon Foundation, the Kempf Memorial Fund, and the European Studies Council at the Yale Macmillan Center, and I'm very grateful for their support. Before I introduce today's speaker, let me frame the series a bit for those who have not come to our earlier talks. Decolonial theory has become increasingly important in understanding persistent systems of global inequality and in thinking of alternatives to extractive approaches to our environment that move us quickly towards irreversible damage. Decolonial theory, primarily associated with Latin American thinkers, builds on post-colonial theory most obviously in the shared belief that the consequences of European colonialism continue to shape our present, but it also diverges from it. Decolonial thought consciously decenters Europe and its intellectual traditions. Instead, it aims to recover and build on marginalized traditions of knowledge formation, especially indigenous ones. Decolonial theory is invested in plurality, rejecting grand narratives, proposing not one theory, one method, but many, attentive to local conditions and other specifics, and based in social movement practices as much as in theory. In short, it asks for a different way of thinking about our world, nature, animals, and fellow humans, one that is not based on an Enlightenment hierarchy of value and capitalist notions of property. And that must have material consequences, including a return of colonized lands to indigenous communities. According to decolonial theorists, the colonial world order is still present literally everywhere. Maybe most fundamentally in our relationship to land as property to be exploited rather than cared for as the source of all life. Sustainable ways of living with the land practiced outside of Europe have in the course of colonialism been defined as primitive, backwards, uncivilized, and are still equated with underdevelopment. We still routinely talk about the West as most developed, while we are facing the literal destruction of Earth due to the West's exploitative approach to nature. This, to decolonial thinkers, shows that we are still living with a colonial mindset or in a state of coloniality. And I think we can all agree that that makes a lot of sense. But it leaves us with the question where Europe, home of the colonizers rather than the colonized, fits into a decolonial model, if at all. This is a challenging question and one that many decolonial theorists from outside of Europe are not primarily interested in, for good reasons. European values, ideas, interests have dominated their cultures for centuries, and they are primarily concerned with recovering what has seemingly been lost. But as I mentioned, one of the tenets of decolonial theory is its commitment to multiple decentralized approaches. What exactly decolonization means has to be considered for each individual context. Which brings us to the Decolonizing Europe series, which explores exactly this question by focusing on theorists and practitioners thinking through both the ongoing effects of colonialism on Europe and of its potential constructive role in the replacing of Eurocentric modernity with a model that actually offers us a sustainable future. As a European myself, albeit one who does not fit the dominant model of Europeanness, I'm particularly invested in this exploration. And I've invited speakers from Europe who offer thought-provoking and innovative answers. And it is no coincidence that all of them speak from positionalities that mark them as not properly European. in various ways, most of them based on the notion that proper Europeans are white, Christian, or Christianized secular, and fundamentally different from, read superior to, peoples from the global south who remain excluded from a racialized understanding of full humanness. For exactly this reason, it is improper or improbable Europeanness that to me holds the greatest potential of including the continent in the global process of decolonization. But before I finally introduce today's speakers, one more reminder: this is not always or ever an easy conversation. European modernity and with it European colonialism introduced a system of violent power hierarchies, racism, genocide, and exploitation that we have yet to overcome. These topics are not distant and theoretical to us, but deeply personal. As a Yale community, we are in the fortunate position to be able to deeply and thoughtfully explore these topics beyond sound bites and cliches. And we should honor this by engaging respectfully with each other. As an administrator responsible for this event, I remind you that Yale is committed to protecting free expression and peaceful dissent. Interfering with the speaker's ability to speak and the audience's ability to hear and see is not consistent with the university's free expression policy. Now, finally, let me introduce Houria Bouteldja, one of the most important European voices in this conversation. Houria Bouteldja is a founding member of the Parti des Indigènes de la République, a decolonial political party based in France. She wrote numerous theoretical, strategical articles on decolonial feminism, racism, autonomy, and political alliances, as well as articles on Zionism and philosemitism. She is the author of Sadri Khiari of Nous, sommes, indigenes de la république, translated into English as Whites, Jews, and Us towards a politics of revolutionary love. And this year, I believe, Beauts et Barbares, the pari du Nous. She recently resigned from the party, but she's still a decolonial activist. Today, she will speak on France and whiteness, breaking with the collaboration of race. Please join me in welcoming Houria Bouteldja.
Bonjour à tous. I'm going to speak in French, and Fadel is going to translate, to read my translation. Donc bonjour à tous, salam alaikum, hi. Le titre de mon intervention, c'est l'État racial intégral, qui n'est pas tout à fait le titre que j'avais proposé, donc l'État racial intégral, en finir avec la collaboration de races.
So I'm just translating the title, which is different from what you proposed first, the integral racial state, ending the collaboration of race. So you still have a French accent with
Because she's French too.
I don't know why I'm doing this. Very French.
At least it's the French accent. Merci à Fatima et EI-Tayeb et à l'université de Yale pour cette invitation. Et merci à vous tous d'être là pour m'écouter.
So thank you to Fatima EI-Tayeb and Yale University for this invitation. Tu veux continuer?
Non,
je lis tout.
Non, parce que t'es pas dit. Ah.
So, non, vas-y.
Ah, d'accord. Et donc, merci aussi à toi, Fadela, de me lire.
Thanks to me.
Alors, je voudrais commencer par préciser que je parle ici en tant que militante décoloniale et non en tant qu'universitaire. C'est important de le dire car mon propos n'a de sens que dans le contexte de la lutte politique et de la dynamique des rapports de force. Je voudrais aussi préciser que si je vais aborder ici la notion de blanchité, ce ne sera qu'à partir d'une perspective française. Je n'ignore pas qu'il existe une production historique de la blanchité que nous sommes nombreux, décoloniaux, à faire remonter à 1492, début de la modernité occidentale, une modernité occidentale définie par nous comme suit. Je te laisse.
So I would like to begin by making it clear that I'm speaking here as a decolonial activist and not as an academic. I would also like to make it clear that if I'm going to discuss the notion of whiteness here, it will only be from a French perspective. I am aware that there is a historical production of whiteness that many of us decolonials trace back to 1492, the beginning of Western modernity, Western modernity defined by us as
une globalité historique caractérisée par le capital, la domination coloniale, postcoloniale, l'État moderne et le système éthique hégémonique qui lui est associé.
A historical globality characterized by capital, colonial, post-colonial domination, the modern state, and the associated hegemonic ethical system.
Je n'ignore pas non plus que la blanchité s'applique aux peuples d'extraction européenne à qui elle confère un statut et un pouvoir. La blanchité étant essentiellement un rapport de pouvoir entretenu par les États occidentaux, c'est-à-dire les pays capitalistes avancés, sous la forme de la domination raciale. Même s'il existe un socle commun à l'ensemble du pouvoir blanc à l'échelle de la planète et à ceux qui en bénéficient, il n'en reste pas moins que chaque État-nation impérialiste a produit une blanchité spécifique.
I am also aware that it applies to peoples of European extraction to whom it confers status and power. Whiteness is essentially a power relationship maintained by Western states, that is to say, the advanced capitalist countries, in the form of racial domination. Even if there is a common basis for all white power on a global scale and for those who benefit from it, it remains true that each imperialist nation state has produced a specific whiteness.
Je voudrais donc m'attarder ici sur la blanchité française, que je crois être très différente de la blanchité états-unienne. Comme je suppose, elle est différente de la blanchité britannique, australienne ou encore différente de la blanchité en formation de certains pays d'Europe de l'Est, comme la Hongrie, candidate à l'intégration européenne et qui, pour accélérer son processus de blanchiment dans l'Union européenne, fait le choix d'un fascisme décomplexé pour, d'une certaine manière, devenir plus blanc que les véritables blancs d'Europe de l'Est, de l'Ouest. I have to continue?
Yes, continue, please.
S'il faut en effet défaire la collaboration de race en France, qui prend forme à travers ce que nous avons appelé le pacte racial, il faut étudier de près la blanchité française produite par ce que j'ai appelé dans mon dernier livre l'État racial intégral. J'emprunte l'idée d'État intégral au théoricien marxiste Antonio Gramsci qui définit l'État comme étant composé de 3 instances.
So I would like to focus here on French whiteness, which I believe to be very different from US whiteness, just as I suppose it is different from British or Australian whiteness, or even different from the whiteness in the making of certain Eastern European countries, such as Hungary, which is a candidate for European integration, and which, in order to accelerate its process of whitening into the EU, has chosen a decomplexed fascism in a way to become whiter than the true whites of Western Europe. If it is indeed necessary to undo the collaboration of race in France that takes shape through what we have called the racial pact, it is necessary to study closely the French whiteness produced by what I call in my last book, the integral racial state. I borrow the idea of the integral state from the Marxist theorist Antonio Gramsci, who defines the state as being composed of 3 instances.
Donc, les 3 instances, la première, donc il définit l'État intégral à travers 3 instances. La première, c'est l'État et ses institutions, son administration, sa bureaucratie, sa police, son armée. 2, la société politique. 3, la société civile.
Okay, so the 3 instances are 1, the state and its institutions, its administrations, its bureaucracy, its police, its army. Second is political society, and 3, civil society.
Donc, juste, je résume, et je vais dire exactement la même chose. L'État intégral, selon Gramsci, c'est ces trois instances, l'État, la société politique, la société civile. So, for Gramsci, the integral state is the state, the politic society and the civil society. Donc, pour Gramsci, la puissance du bloc bourgeois s'explique parce que celui-ci domine l'État, évidemment, mais cela ne suffit pas. En effet, l'État bourgeois a su créer en plus un lien organique entre lui et la société. Il a su faire valoir un intérêt commun entre lui, les représentants politiques et syndicaux et la société civile. À partir de cette définition, je propose, moi, l'idée d'État racial intégral que j'explique ainsi. Si le racisme en France est systémique, c'est que l'État moderne, dominé par la bourgeoisie capitaliste, a su créer un lien organique, non seulement entre lui et la société politique, y compris celle représentant l'opposition de classe, comme le Parti communiste français, mais aussi avec la société civile, composée de cette unité qu'on appelle citoyen et qui représente le corps légitime de la nation, les Blancs.
So for Gramsci, the power of the bourgeois bloc can be explained by the fact that it obviously dominates the state, but this is not enough. In fact, the bourgeois state has also been able to create an organic link between itself and society. It has been able to assert a common interest between itself, the political and trade union representatives, and civil society. From this definition, I propose the idea of an integral racial state, which I explain as follows. If racism in France is systemic, it is because the modern state, dominated by the capitalist bourgeoisie, has been able to create an organic link not only between itself and political society, including that representing the class oppositions, such as the Communist Party, but also with civil society composed of that unit, which is called citizen, and which represents the legitimate body of the nation, whites.
Pour résumer, en régime capitaliste, si le racisme est structurel et systémique, c'est qu'il y a collaboration de race entre la bourgeoisie, les organisations politiques et syndicales et la société civile. Donc, contrairement à ce que prétend le philosophe français Jacques Rancière, le racisme n'est pas qu'une passion d'en haut, c'est aussi une passion d'en bas. Et contrairement à ce que prétend un certain antiracisme d'État, qui voudrait effacer la responsabilité des élites et des institutions, le racisme n'est pas qu'une passion d'en bas, Cette manière d'appréhender le pacte racial à travers l'État intégral nous permet de voir que personne n'est innocent, ni l'État, ni la société politique, ni la société civile, et que tous collaborent pour faire du racisme un élément structurel de l'ordre capitaliste.
So to sum up, in the capitalist regime, if racism is structural and systemic, it is because there is a collaboration of race between the bourgeoisie, the political and trade union organizations, and civil society. Contrary to what the French philosopher Jacques Rancière claims, racism is not only a passion from above, it is also a passion from below. And contrary to the claims of a certain state, anti-racism that would like to erase the responsibility of elites and institutions, racism is not only a passion from below. This way of understanding the racial pact through the integral state allows us to see that nobody is innocent. Neither the state, nor the political society, nor the civil society, and that they all collaborate to make racism a structural element of the capitalist order.
Pire que cela, cette analyse déjà faite en partie par Poulantzas, qui est un autre théoricien marxiste, cette analyse nous permet de voir que l'État racial intégral, qu'on appelle en France État-nation républicain, est le fruit de la lutte des classes. Ah oui, pardon. C'est même le nom du compromis historique entre le bloc au pouvoir et la classe ouvrière. On peut l'étendre aujourd'hui aux femmes blanches et aux homosexuels blancs sous la forme de ce qu'on appelle fémonationalisme ou homonationalisme. Pour résumer, qu'on prenne le prisme de la classe, du genre ou de la sexualité, l'égalitarisme français a été nationalisé. À ce propos, on peut citer Domenico Losurdo, qui a écrit
So worse than that, this analysis, already made in part by Poulantzas, allows us to see that the integral racial state, which in France is called the Republican nation state, is the fruit of the class struggle. It is even the name of the historical compromise between the ruling bloc and the working class. It can be extended today to white women and white homosexuals in the form of what is called femo-nationalism and homo-nationalism. To sum up, whether we take the prism of class, gender, or sexuality, French egalitarianism has been nationalized. In this regard, we can quote Domenico Losurdo, an Italian Marxist, who wrote,
l'histoire, donc il wrote, l'histoire de l'Occident se trouve face à un paradoxe. La nette ligne de démarcation entre blanc d'une part, noir et peau rouge d'autre part, favorise le développement de rapports d'égalité à l'intérieur de la communauté blanche.
The history of the West is faced with a paradox. The clear line of demarcation between whites on the one hand and blacks and redskins on the other favors the development of relations of equality within the white community.
Je veux malgré tout apporter ici une précision importante. Si personne n'est innocent, il y a une échelle des responsabilités. Le bloc au pouvoir reste le principal responsable de la pérennisation du racisme, car c'est lui qui a le plus intérêt à la structuration raciale de la société. En d'autres termes, c'est lui qui en tire le maximum de bénéfices. Lorsque les niveaux de responsabilité sont identifiés et la répartition des avantages faite, cela nous permet d'identifier évidemment l'ennemi principal, mais également la nature de la collaboration de race, dont le but ultime est de maintenir l'ordre impérialiste, dont la France est un acteur important à l'échelle du monde. En France, le pacte racial est aussi un pacte social, puisque la rente impérialiste est distribuée, certes de manière non égalitaire, entre les classes dominantes et la classe ouvrière, incluant toutes les composantes de la société civile, y compris les minorités de genre et sexuelles.
However, I would like to make an important clarification here. Although no one is innocent, there is a scale of responsibility. The ruling bloc remains the most responsible for the perpetuation of racism because it has the greatest interest in the racial structuring of society. In other words, it is the one that benefits the most. When the levels of responsibility are identified and the distribution of benefits made, it allows us to identify the main enemy, but also the nature of the collaboration of race, whose ultimate goal is to maintain the imperialist order of which France is an important actor on a world scale. In France, the racial pact is also a social pact, since the imperialist rent is distributed, albeit unequally, between the dominant classes and the working class, including all components of civil society, including gender and sexual minorities.
Mais le pacte racial, dont j'ai dit plus haut qu'il était un compromis de classe, a sa propre histoire et sa propre évolution. Le blanchiment des Français s'est accéléré grâce ou à cause de la Révolution française. À l'époque de la Révolution, la France était certes déjà un pays esclavagiste, mais seuls les riches et les possédants tiraient bénéfice du commerce des esclaves.
But the racial pact, which I said above was a class compromise, has its own history and its own evolution. The widening of the French was accelerated by or because of the French Revolution. At the time of the Revolution, France was certainly already a slave-owning country, but only the rich and the wealthy benefited from the slave trade.
En effet, des historiens français, évoquant le moment qui précède le rétablissement de l'esclavage par Bonaparte, racontent que les rapports de police de l'époque montraient que l'opinion française n'était pas du tout acquise à la politique impériale de l'empereur. Celle-ci était d'abord une affaire de possédants, de colons, de fonctionnaires, de négociants, d'armateurs des ports, de certains ministres, généraux ou amiraux. lorsque Bonaparte décide de rétablir l'esclavage, il est obligé de mentir. C'est évidemment un effet de la révolution haïtienne, mais aussi de l'opinion française travaillée politiquement et subjectivement par la Révolution et la Déclaration des Loms de 1793. On sait donc qu'à l'époque, le sentiment populaire était plutôt anti-esclavagiste et que les idéaux de la Révolution française étaient, aussi inachevés soient-ils, nourrissaient un certain humanisme. Mais parallèlement, l'institution de l'État-nation a fait son œuvre. Le français de souche a supplanté le paysan traditionnel et attaché à sa terre, comme il a supplanté le prolétaire, L'histoire de l'abandon des idéaux internationalistes n'est ni linéaire ni univoque, mais les tendances lourdes du chauvinisme sont-elles sans équivoque. Aujourd'hui, le consensus impérialiste est généralisé. Ce consensus favorable aux interventions françaises, justifié par la mission civilisatrice et depuis 20 ans par la lutte contre le terrorisme, a produit une indifférence de l'opinion aux ravages des guerres et renforcé l'adhésion à l'idée que la France doit assumer un rôle de puissance mondiale.
Indeed, French historians, referring to the time before Bonaparte re-established slavery, say that the police reports of the time showed that French opinion was not at all in favor of the emperor's imperial policy. This was primarily a matter for the owners, colonists, civil servants, merchants, port owners, certain ministers, generals, and admirals. When Bonaparte decided to re-establish slavery, he was forced to lie. This was obviously an effect of the Haitian Revolution, but also of French opinion, which had been politically and subjectively affected by the revolution and the 1793 Declaration of the Rights of Man. It is therefore known that at the time, popular sentiment was rather anti-slavery, and that the ideals of the French Revolution, however unfinished, nourished a certain humanism. But at the same time, the institution of the nation state took effect. The native Frenchman replaced the traditional peasant attached to his land, just as he replaced the proletarian. The history of the abandonment of internationalist ideals is neither linear nor unequivocal, but the major trends of chauvinism are unequivocal. Today, the imperialist consensus is widespread. This consensus, which is favorable to French interventions, justified by the civilizing mission, and for the past 20 years by the fight against terrorism, has produced an indifference in public opinion to the ravages of war and reinforced the idea that France must assume a role as a world power.
Ce qui est important dans ce petit rappel historique, c'est que les ancêtres des Français étaient autres et, ma foi, très peu blancs. Autrefois, Bonaparte pouvait craindre l'opinion populaire quand il s'en allait coloniser au point de devoir user de mensonges pour arriver à ses fins, tandis que les menées impérialistes de Mitterrand en Irak, de Chirac en Afghanistan, de Sarkozy en Libye, de Hollande au Mali, de Macron au Sahel ne provoquent que l'indifférence quand elles ne sont pas tout bonnement approuvées.
What is important in this little historical reminder is that the ancestors of the French were other and very unwhite, I might add. In the past, Bonaparte might have feared popular opinion when he went to colonize, to the extent that he had to use lies to achieve his ends. Whereas the imperialist actions of Mitterrand in Iraq, Chirac in Afghanistan, Sarkozy in Libya, Hollande in Mali, and Macron in the Sahel provoke only indifference when they are not simply approved.
Aujourd'hui, l'identité française est clairement une identité blanche, car c'est une identité d'empire. Elle s'est cristallisée à travers plusieurs siècles de domination coloniale et s'est consolidée via la formation de l'État-nation. Je le dis et je le répète, un État-nation qui est autant la volonté du bloc bourgeois qu'une volonté populaire, c'est-à-dire un compromis de la lutte des classes. Si je le souligne lourdement, c'est qu'on ne peut pas espérer la fin de la collaboration de race entre la bourgeoisie et le peuple blanc tant que le pacte racial rétribue les Blancs sur le plan social, économique et symbolique. Bien sûr, il importe de prendre en compte et surtout de soutenir les luttes non blanches qui mettent en cause le pacte racial, mais il importe aussi de prendre conscience que le rapport de force rendu possible par ces luttes n'est jamais suffisamment puissant pour abattre le suprémacisme blanc. C'est pourquoi il faut, de mon point de vue, profiter du déclin de l'impérialisme français pour mettre en place des stratégies d'unification des classes populaires, blanches et non blanches, au moment où, d'un côté, le bloc au pouvoir s'apprête à trahir les classes populaires blanches, et de l'autre, le fascisme, qui est un projet de compensation identitaire face au déclin blanc, prospère à l'échelle de l'Occident.
Today, French identity is clearly a white identity because it is an identity of empire. It has crystallized through several centuries of colonial domination and has been consolidated through the formation of the nation state. I say it again, a nation state that is as much the will of the bourgeois bloc as it is a popular will. That is a compromise of the class struggle. If I stress this heavily, it is because we cannot hope for an end to the collaboration of race between the bourgeoisie and the white people as long as the racial pact rewards whites socially, economically, and symbolically. Of course, it is important to take into account and especially to support non-white struggles that challenge the racial pact. But it is also important to realize that the balance of power made possible by these struggles is never strong enough to bring down white supremacy. This is why, in my opinion, we must take advantage of the decline of French imperialism to put in place strategies to unite the white and non-white working classes at a time when, on the one hand, the ruling bloc is preparing to betray the white working classes, and on the other, fascism, which is an identity-based compensation project in the face of white decline, is flourishing throughout the West.
Aujourd'hui, la France traverse une crise démocratique et sociale majeure. Le pacte social est en crise. Si l'identité française est une identité d'empire, force est de constater que l'impérialisme français est aussi en crise et que celui-ci décline. Et c'est ce déclin qui déstabilise le pacte social et donc la logique organique qui permet la collaboration de races. En effet, les Français ne sont fidèles au pacte racial impérial que parce qu'ils bénéficient d'une partie de la rente impérialiste, mais lorsque la domination française décline, c'est-à-dire la part de la bourgeoisie française, c'est elle qui décline, eh bien le pacte social s'affaiblit d'autant. C'est ce qui se passe depuis la crise financière de 2008, qui a eu un impact direct sur la condition sociale des classes populaires blanches et qui a eu pour conséquence directe l'insurrection des Gilets jaunes et aujourd'hui des mobilisations politiques et syndicales historiques contre la réforme des retraites. Le moment que nous sommes en train de vivre est un moment stratégique. Si la conscience de classe du mouvement social comprenait que la race était une modalité de la classe comme technologie d'exploitation et d'organisation de l'ordre social, tout comme la classe est une modalité de la race, alors elle pourrait se saisir de cette effervescence sociale pour renforcer la lutte des classes et affaiblir, voire rompre avec le pacte racial. On voit bien en effet comment, dans des moments de forte agitation sociale, le bloc au pouvoir est tenté par l'option fasciste et, pour le dire autrement, par une réponse suprémaciste réactivant les leviers du pacte racial au détriment du pacte social.
So today, France is going through a major democratic and social crisis. The social pact is in crisis. If French identity is an identity of empire, it must be said that French imperialism is also in crisis and that it is declining. And it is this decline that destabilizes the social pact and therefore the organic logic that allows for racial collaboration. Indeed, the French are only faithful to the racial imperial pact because they benefit from a part of the imperialist rent. But when French domination declines, that is to say, the share of the French bourgeoisie, the social pact is weakened. This is what has been happening since the financial crisis of 2008, which had a direct impact on the social condition of the white working classes and which directly resulted in the insurrection of the yellow vests. And today, the historic political and trade union mobilizations against the pension reform. The moment we are living is a strategic one. If the class consciousness of the social movement understood that race was a modality of class as a technology of exploitation and organization of the social order, just as class is a modality of race, then it could seize this social effervescence to strengthen the class struggle and weaken or even break with the racial pact. We can see how in moments of strong social unrest, the ruling bloc is tempted by the fascist option, and to put it another way, by a supremacist response that reactivates the levers of the racial pact at the expense of the social pact.
Malheureusement, je suis assez lucide sur la suite. La rupture de la collaboration de race n'aura pas lieu à l'issue de ce mouvement, malgré sa force et sa détermination. Tout ce qu'on peut dire, c'est que la puissance du mouvement social fait reculer momentanément le fascisme. C'est la raison pour laquelle je le soutiens. Malgré tout, je pense qu'il ne faut pas cesser de politiser la question de la blanchité et faire de la rupture de la collaboration de race un enjeu politique central dont l'objectif serait de créer l'unité d'un bloc populaire formé de l'ensemble du prolétariat blanc et non blanc.
Unfortunately, I am quite clear about what will happen next. The rupture of racial collaboration will not take place at the end of this movement, despite its strength and determination. All that can be said is that the power of the social movement is momentarily pushing back fascism. That is why I support it. Despite everything, I think that we must not stop politicizing the question of whiteness and make the rupture of racial collaboration a central political issue, the objective of which would be to create the unity of a popular bloc made up of the entire white and non-white proletariat.
Working class. À ce stade de mon propos, vous auriez le droit de penser que cette proposition est naïve, car nous sommes très loin d'abolir l'État racial intégral. Et vous auriez raison. Même si je peux constater qu'en France, une nouvelle conscience blanche décoloniale est vraiment en train de naître, notamment dans une partie de la jeunesse et de la gauche radicale, nous sommes encore très loin d'atteindre l'hégémonie. L'intérêt à rester blanc reste l'option la plus forte et la plus probable, d'autant qu'en période de crise, c'est la peur et les instincts de conservation qui dominent et non le courage ou l'esprit révolutionnaire. Mais il reste un aspect qu'il faut envisager dans la lutte décoloniale. C'est la question morale et éthique à l'origine de notre action. Dans mon livre précédent, Les Blancs, les Juifs et nous vers une politique de l'amour révolutionnaire, j'ai écrit une lettre aux Blancs en disant ceci. Tout ce que je sais, c'est que je veux vous échapper autant que je peux.
At this stage of my remarks, you would be entitled to think that this proposal is naive, because we are very, very far from abolishing the integral racial state. And you would be right. Even if I can see that in France, a new decolonial white consciousness is really emerging, especially among a part of the youth and the radical left, we are still very far from reaching hegemony. The interest in remaining white remains the strongest and the most likely option, especially since in times of crisis, it is fear and self-preservation instincts that dominate not courage or a revolutionary spirit. But there is still one aspect that must be considered in the decolonial struggle. This is the moral and ethical question at the root of our action. In my previous book, The Whites, Jews, and Us, Towards a Politics of Revolutionary Love, I wrote a letter to whites saying, all I know is that I want to escape you as much as I can.
Ce que je voulais signifier, c'est que je refuse le processus de blanchiment dont je suis victime moi-même. Ainsi, concrètement, échapper aux Blancs, c'est avant tout refuser radicalement l'intégration par le racisme. Ou pour le dire autrement, refuser de devenir raciste soi-même. Ainsi, je ne peux pas voir les Blancs comme autre chose qu'une catégorie produite par l'histoire. Si tel est le cas, je dois me forcer à penser que si elle a été faite par l'histoire, des rapports de force, elle doit aussi être défaite par les rapports de force, ce qui nécessite de croire aux acteurs qui feront l'histoire du futur, c'est-à-dire tous les acteurs. C'est-à-dire qu'il faut croire aux peuples qui vivent sous l'impérialisme et qui vont lutter. 1. 2, il faut croire en nous qui vivons au cœur de l'impérialisme et qui formons un sud des Nords. Et enfin, il faut croire aux Blancs. En effet, c'est paradoxalement en croyant aux Blancs, croire en leur possibilité de réforme, que je détruis en moi toute possibilité de devenir blanche.
What I meant was that I refuse the process of whitewashing of which I myself am a victim. So in concrete terms, escaping from whites is above all a radical refusal of integration through racism. Or to put it another way, refusing to become a racist. Thus, I cannot see whiteness as anything other than a historically produced category. If this is the case, I must force myself to think that if it was made by the history of power relations, it must also be defeated by power relations. This requires believing in the actors who will make the history of the future, that is to say, all the actors. Believing in the peoples who live under imperialism, believing in us who live at the heart of imperialism and who form a south of the north. And finally, believing in whites. Indeed, it is paradoxically by believing in whites, believing in their possibility for reform, that I destroy in myself any possibility of becoming white.
Merci. Merci.
Thank you very much, Houria, and thanks again to my colleague Kabila for leading. We have time for questions. I think what we'll try to do is to start out with questions here and then check with Christina, who's monitoring the Zoom participation, and see if there are questions there. Fatima here and Tim, who sits over there, our student workers, will help us keep track of the questions. What I would ask you to do, if you have a question, raise your hand. Before you ask, just briefly introduce yourself. You can ask in English. Houria will answer in English, and if necessary, Vanilla will help with translation if she's still okay.
Okay.
Other people
Do my best.
All right. Are there any questions, comments to what we heard?
Yeah, thank you so much for your great talk. It's amazing to have you here. I'm Ali. I'm a second-year PhD student in the French department, working mainly on the banlieue and the literature from the banlieue. You talk about like this idea of like alliance between the white and non-whites, and you talk in your book about like this risk of being like subordinated by like joining the left for like the non-West, like joining the left. And I was wondering under what conditions you think about how this alliance would like escape this subordination, and how would that alliance would be possible?
The only way to escape subordination is to construct our own autonomy. This is the only way to escape it. So it's a question of balance of forces. That's it. This is what happens in Algeria, in Haiti, in everywhere. Question of if we are able to build our own force, the colonial force, against whiteness, even against the white left.
Hi, Elisa. I'm a third year in the French department. I work on queer literature. In your book, you start out with
Which one?
Beauts et Barbares.
Beauts et Barbares.
The new book. You start out with the question of hope, that it is hard to have hope in the contemporary moment, but that you want to try anyways. And I was wondering if you were willing to talk about what gives you hope and what the utopia is that you work with.
Actually, nothing. It's only because I'm an activist. I have to keep staying, to keep the faith in the struggle, the political struggle. I think that everything can happen. Actually, I'm exaggerating a little bit. I think that everything, there can be miracles, but in the actual balance of forces in Europe, which is in favor of fascism, I think it would be very, very difficult. Very difficult. It's in favor in Europe. It's in favor of fascism and liberalism. So there are two brothers, fascism and liberalism. So it's difficult to think that something miraculous could happen. But I think we have to keep the faith. If not, we will be destroyed before. That's it. Yes.
Salut.
Salut.
My name is Roy. I'm a second year PhD student in anthropology. And yeah, listening to what you're saying, I'm wondering if you have engaged with Afro-pessimists or Afro-pessimism, and what your thoughts are on Afro-pessimism in relation to your activism.
I don't know much about Afro-pessimism, but tell me if I'm wrong. Afro-pessimism, the solution for Afro-pessimism is to go back to Africa or not, or to be completely separated?
No, it's the end of the world.
The end of the world.
So basically, they're saying that that's the only time when Black people essentially will be free is when the world is ended, because everything and everyone, even non-Black people, work in tandem with white structures and draw from Black people in a kind of an extractive way.
Yeah.
But there is no benefit. So they critique coalitions and multiculturalism. And I mean, there's a lot more to it, but I'm not the most well-versed in it. But I think Afro-pessimists are more critical with ideas of like multiculturalism and like coalitions and people of color coalitions, because they say that it doesn't really benefit Black people because it's usually extractive. And there's a kind of, I guess you could say, parasitic relationship there. But yeah, if you haven't engaged with it, then yeah, it's a bit complex to explain, because even I'm still not 100% sure.
So what I understand is that they don't believe in the fact that whiteness can be destroyed.
Basically, yeah, because
until the end of time.
You have to destroy the world and start essentially again.
I think it's difficult to. I don't agree.
Okay.
I don't agree with that because the end of time, I don't know where it is. It could be in 1,000 years.
Yeah.
And
well,
whiteness exists.
Destroy the world, basically.
Yes, possibly.
Yeah.
Yes. But as I told, this is why I finished with myself. I want to believe in the end for moral reasons that are linked to my own ethic. I don't want to become like whites, that they build this world as it is. I know that it is a historical process, and I believe in the end of the historical process. Maybe because of ecological reasons, we are living the end of the world. It would be because of modern society. And that's true. But if we are not living the end of the world, I think it can finish. But it's always a question of balance of power and the end of white supremacy, which will not only be the results only of our own struggle, but it can be the result of other things. The competition between empires.
Yeah.
But the question is the Chinese empire, will we conduct whiteness? This is a question. I think it's possible. I think it's possible.
So do you have any, because it sounded like you didn't really have much faith in things changing, and
this is why I was talking, I'm very pessimistic. This is why I was talking about the racial integral state. This is something that is hard. This is not something that can be destroyed easily. So from this point of view, I'm pessimistic, but in the same time, if I was only pessimistic, I don't need to accept an invitation in Yale. Ça voudrait dire que it would mean that I have to stop struggling. There is here a contradiction. If I am struggling, it's because I have a little faith. Yes.
And then lastly, I just want to know if you have kind of thought about the rest of Europe and how it relates to, you know, what you've been saying today about whiteness and whiteness. I wonder if you've thought about other European countries in relation to what you've been talking about today, whiteness. I wonder if you can maybe talk about your thoughts on other.
If I can talk about
maybe your thoughts on other European countries and its connection to whiteness and what you were talking about whiteness in France.
About our link to other countries, I don't.
Just so how can I explain it?
Si vous avez réfléchi aux autres pays européens, à la question de la blanchité dans d'autres contextes européens.
Yes, we are part of a network called Decolonial International Network.
Okay.
And the activists of Spain think about this question in Spain.
Okay.
The activists of the Netherlands, the same, etc., etc. So we share our experiences, yes, but I don't think in the place of a Belgian, for example. He thinks for himself.
Okay.
And then we share all our experiences, and we are part of a global network, yes.
Thank you. Merci.
Hello, my name is Qasim. I'm from Morocco, and I'm a research assistant in economics at Barbares here at the Matlon Center. Thanks very much for this talk. It's very interesting. So my question is the following. It relates to North African societies with the old colonizer, which is France. So there's kind of a paradox because North Africans are obviously discriminated against in France, but at home, they discriminate against Africans. So all sorts of stereotypes about migrants, basically there's too many of them and all other bad stereotypes, but basically whatever you hear in France about North Africans, you hear it in Morocco, just replace North African by Black. So it's quite of a paradox. Like North African in France, white at home. I'm just curious about what is your opinion about this? Where does it come from? Can we say that it's whiteness in North African society?
First of all, I don't think it's a paradox. It's something quite normal because we are all integrated in the capitalist and imperialist world. And everywhere in the world, there is a scale of whiteness, and everyone wants to be more whiter than the others. So we all want, this is why I finished this saying, I don't want to become white. I am in France, and I am white, even if I don't want to, because I'm benefiting objectively of imperialism. I have a passport, I can come here, which is not the case of Moroccan people who don't have European passports to travel everywhere in the world. So I benefit partly from whiteness, and I can't escape, socially speaking, my whiteness. I am white. For people in Africa, I am white because it is a relation of power. Whiteness is a relation of power. But politically, I refuse to be and to integrate this world. This is only politically that I don't want to become white. And actually, I think that most of our people, I'm talking about the people who we left in North Africa, my family in Africa, they want to become white. But there is oppression everywhere in the world, and even inside Europe. Inside Europe, Hungary, we say, Hungary is not a real white country, but it's today the most fascist one, because he wants to elevate itself inside Europe, and this is why it is more white than the others. So what is happening in Hungary is happening also in North Africa. And we have to say that Northern African states are paid by Europe to protect the frontier of Europe. So now the frontier of Europe are in North Africa. So Arab people, Arab countries are participating to this imperial order. This is why they are objectively racist. They are racist, yes.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak. I have two questions, but they're both very quick. Both are yes or no. You've been accused in the past of being homophobic and including homophobic ideology in your writing. And I have a simple yes or no question for you. Do you support the universal equal rights for the LGBTQ community, including the right to marry?
You are right.
Yes or no question.
I was accused of being homophobic, anti-Semite, anti-white racist, and misogynic. This is true. And no, I'm not homophobic, anti-Semite, anti-white racist, and misogynic. I am decolonial. And for the question of LGBT, I can't answer this question by yes or no, because I have first to say that we can't accept universal rights if we don't first understand that the LGBT identity is not universal. Homosexuality is universal. There are homosexuals everywhere in the world, but political identities are not universal. This is what I say. And if political identity are not universal, and if everywhere in the world people don't want to politicize their sexuality, this is their own right to refuse to politicize their sexuality. I'm just saying from a decolonial point of view that we can't generalize a political identity that was born in the political, in the advanced capitalist countries.
And thank you. My second question, again, yes or no, and I prefer if you said yes or no, but
I can't say yes or no, I have to explain.
do you unequivocally condemn the attacks of, and excuse me if I mispronounce his name, Mohammed Merah in 2012, which I believe killed 7 people, including.
I think I would like to interrupt you here for 2 reasons. One is the question itself. The other is a waste of time, frankly, to have Houria answer questions she answered many times before, also in writing. So what you could simply do is read her work. And as I said in the beginning, the advantage of this context is that we don't have to produce sound bites. So why ask a question that requires a yes or no answer instead of actually engaging?
Are you asking me, or are you, because I mean, if you'd answer, that would be kind, but if not, I respect your right to not
I
answer.
can, it's very easy for me to answer this question because it's easy for you to read my paper on Mohamed Merah, which is in French and in English. And I condemned this attack and I explained why. And I'm saying that if Mohamed Merah killed Jewish people, it's because he was integrated in white supremacy. This is, and I said, Mohamed Merah is killed people because he's integrated in a European anti-Semite country.
I appreciate that you answer this question, but again, just please read the paper.
Read the paper,
referenced.
it's very easy
Then
to
you have your
understand
answer.
what I said, very easy.
Thank you for allowing me the access to speak.
Sam has a
You're
question.
welcome.
Thank you again for the intervention. I'm Sam, second year PhD student, French and African American Studies. And Elisa earlier with her question evoked the title of your book, Beauts et Barbares. And I wondered if you could speak more about the second portion about Barbares and sort of the sort of links of solidarity within that conceptualization of identity and what work is required to sort of, what work is required within that conception to sort of, which seems to go along with what you've presented in this intervention in regards to the work that has to be done to abandon whiteness.
Oui,
Ok.
vas-y, tu peux
Ouais,
faire.
non, il n'y a pas de souci. Donc, je m'intéresse plutôt à la deuxième partie du titre du
livre Barbare.
Oui, voilà. Et le travail qu'il faut faire afin de créer cette identité, afin de créer cette, il me semble, cette solidarité qui permet, après avoir créé ce lien de barbare, qui permet encore d'entretenir la relation entre ces barbares et l'État racial intégral et la collaboration des classes blanches. Qu'est-ce qu'il faut? Parce qu'il me semble que l'identité barbare, ça vient pas de soi, parce que là-dedans, il y a des gens qui viennent de plusieurs diasporas, de plusieurs origines. Alors, qu'est-ce qu'on est obligé de faire afin de créer cette possibilité de collaboration, de solidarité en tant que barbare?
Donc d'autonomie, d'organisation d'autonomie indigène, quoi.
Ouais.
Non blanche.
Oui, c'est ça.
English. We are facing if you want to build a balance of power, if we want to build a decolonial perspective, an autonomy, a decolonial autonomy, if we want to organize ourselves as non-whites, we have to solve a lot of contradictions. The first one is the dream of integration. This is Mohamed Merah, the dream to make an end of the dream of integration, which is not easy because in France, non-white people want, their dream is to become real French. We have to solve the problem of racism inside our communities. We have to, because we are racist against, as Arabs, we can be racist against Black. We can be Black and Arabs can be racist against Roma people. Roma people who are we have to solve the question of gender, but not only the the question of patriarchy. Not only this, we have to solve also the issue of masculinity, of subaltern masculinities. We have to solve the issue. I was talking about racism. I can add anti-Semitism. So we have a lot of contradiction to solve, and we have to solve another problem is the fact that we need to have the power, which is not an easy question. It's not obvious that people want to conquer the power, because we have to be very courageous to want to go and to think that we have to take the lead in the country where we are not seen as legitimate. So you imagine what is the task of a revolutionary decolonial project. It's very, very, very difficult, and other problems to solve. To not neutralize, of course, the state, but not only the state, neutralize the attacks of the left and the radical left also.
Thank you for being here. My name is Isabel. I'm a senior undergraduate in Yale College. I'm studying anthropology and French, and I'm currently working on my kind of undergraduate senior essay this year. And a large part of that project has been thinking about kind of the descriptions and application of racial categories to describe French Jews. And so I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about the second part of, in the title of your book, The Whites, the Jews, and Us. I know in your presentation, we talked a lot about kind of the white French identity versus non-white French identities. And I'd be really curious to hear a little bit more about that kind of second portion of the equation presented in the book title. So if you could just expand on that a little bit more.
The Jews you're right, the Jews in France are, racially speaking, quite invisible. We don't know if they are whites or if they are non-whites, or if they are indigenous like us, that is to say, people suffering from structural racism. Actually, it is a category by itself, because since after World War II, as the nation state has not been taken into question, remis en question. The nation state hasn't been questioned. On the contrary, it has been protected. That is to say that white supremacy still exists, and the French nation state is always a white state because it has not been questioned. So Jews, because they has not been integrated in whiteness, and because the state is still racialized, the Jews are a category by themselves. They are not whites, but they are not like blacks and Arabs, because now, I'm not talking about the past, now they are not targeted by the police, they are not put in prison or controlled by the police every day, like us, like the men of our communities. They are not targeted in the big medias because anti-Semitism is seen as something wrong, very bad. So they have a specific condition, but in the same times, they didn't succeeded in becoming whites because of something I call French state philosemitism, which is a kind of sophisticated anti-Semitism, which is a part of the behavior of the state. So the French state doesn't want to make Jews whites, and in the same time, the French state does not discriminate them like brown people. This is why this is a racial category, but which, from my point of view, is in danger. because anti-Semitism is still existing in the wide part of the French opinion, and also because philosemitism is a kind of anti-Semitism, of state anti-Semitism that can be changed rapidly. So I think that Jews are in France are still in danger, can be targeted by anti-Semitism, and this is a racial category from my point of view.
Okay, we have room for one more question. I think we should give it to the Zoom audience.
Right. The South of the North is demographically way more important in the United States than in France. So do you think that the decolonial revolution that you're calling for would be more possible here in the US than in France? If no, why?
The US state is so racist. So racist. That's much more pessimistic. I hope I'm wrong.
You're probably not.
Because at the same time, the struggles in the US are a huge and great model for all of us in Europe, for the South of the North in Europe, or for all of us. We can't be real decolonial activists if we don't learn from what happens here, because America is a model. But in the same time, it's not true, because in France, the elites like to say that America is very bad,
yeah.
and France, England are not.
Yeah.
But actually, American racism was born in France and England. So actually, we are the masters of this matrix. So I think we're going to liberate ourselves all together. This is what I think.
Thank you. I think that's a perfect conclusion.